Okay, hi, good evening. Thank you all for being here. Uh, and welcome to our noche for this month of February. So this is supposed to be again for the month of February, but because of the critical conference, of course, and because of other matters, we moved it to last week, and then we had to move it to this week. And so thank you all again for being here, for making the time this Saturday evening. Again, what is Noche? For those of you who are just joining us, now Noche is part of the Department of Philosophy's 10th anniversary celebration. So the department is celebrating its decade as being a formal department of philosophy in charge of the philosophy courses throughout the university. And so part of this year is a reading group per month focusing on the 5 different research thrusts of the department. For this month, we have comparative East-West philosophy, and our author is Byung-Chul Han. Uh, just something about the title of this reading group, Noche. It's a play on the twist of Noche Triste, of old. So the full name is Noche Alegre. So it's a joyful night of talking about philosophy, discussing about concepts, and discussing about our research thrusts going deeper. And so the author of our reading is Byung-Chul Han. He's as it's stated here on our poster, he's a South Korean born Swiss citizen and German thinker. He's a professor at the University of Arts in Berlin. He got his PhD in philosophy from Freiburg, and he wrote extensively on the effect of capital and today's technological society on subjectivity. Well, something more specific. Byung-Chul Han came from South Korea. He studied metallurgy, the Korea University in Seoul, and he was quite drawn to philosophy. And for some reason, and now this is just a quirk. We in one K drama with diba, the Koreans went to Switzerland, so apparently it's a thing also. Even for intellectuals, they're drawn to Switzerland. That's why he went to Freiburg, and that's where he he got his PhD degree. He wrote on the writings of Martin Heidegger. He got his PhD in '94, and then in 2000 he entered the University of Basel, first teaching philosophy there, where he got his Habilitation-Schrift. So after, because in the German university system, after getting your PhD, you need to write another one to be able to teach. So that's where he wrote the University of Basel. Parenthetically, that's where Nietzsche taught before. And then in 2010, he joined the Karlsruhe University. Another connection. This is where Peter Sloterdijk is teaching. So the Karlsruhe University is actually a school today where thinkers from different fields actually teach, discuss different concepts, and it's actually a very nice institute where one would be able to see the intersection between philosophy, between among philosophy, arts, design, architecture, and that's why besides Sloterdijk and Han, there are a lot of other thinkers that do interdisciplinary research in that university. And so other things that Byung-Chul Han wrote on, well, we have for this evening, the Burnout Society. He also wrote on Transparency Society. And what's nice about Byung-Chul Han as an author is that his texts are really easy on the eyes. You could easily read it or browse through them. In fact, the text for this evening is just 69 pages, including the covers, and the spacing is nearly 1.5, and I think that's 14. I mean, the font size, so it's really easy to read. One thing that we must just to introduce us a bit before we start discussing, and we invite our guest speaker for today, is that Byung-Chul Han is one of the rising thinkers, and he's actually there's this joke I read about him, that he's more German than Germans when it comes to privacy, because it only, I mean, it's just a few years ago that he started to give interviews about his personal life. That's why we don't know much except for those things really that I mentioned, that is also recounted in one interview that he signed up for. And so one last thing is that Byung-Chul Han is a timely writer in the sense that he engages with other authors, contemporary authors, but he's willing to stretch back to quote from, let's say, Cicero, from Aristotle, or from Plato, from these thinkers. And another thing is that he tries to incorporate what he knows. He has a book on how on some connections between Confucianism and capitalism, and so like he tries to bring what he knows into into the dialogue, and that just makes it much more fruitful. And so for this evening, our guest speaker is our very own faculty, Dr. Daniel Reyes. He's an assistant professor of the Department of Philosophy, and he's here to guide us uh, reading this burnout society. So without further ado, may we welcome Dr. Daniel Reyes.
Okay, can you hear me, Anton? And can you see me as well?
Oh, sir. Perfect. Anong renovated pala yung library niyo? Hindi niya sinabi.
Bukas pa pala library ngayon.
Yan ko lang na rin. No? So, to begin with, I prepared for this lecture in a very no. So my apologies for some inconsistencies, no, because again, all of us are part of this burnout society.
Whither is that library? Whither is that library?
No, actually, it's just ibahin ko na. Wala namang covers. I'm just kidding, sir. Ito yan. Puting bahay po
No,
yan.
it's okay. I was just kidding. Whither is that library?
Education is dead.
Okay na, Anton?
Doc, would you want to share the reading, or would you want me to share a text?
Yun nga, I'm using the EPUB version. So I noticed a while ago na baka magkaiba ng pages. So siguro ikaw na lang sasabihin ko na lang yung kung anong chapter siya, then kung anong paragraph yung binabasa ko kasi magkaiba yung paging eh.
Sige po.
Thank you. Para mabawasan ng aking burnout experience. Should we be as relaxed as possible ba, Anton?
Oh, yes, of course. Yun po yung idea behind nung parang Noche Alegre. It's a more relaxed way kaya parang kwentuhan on the text.
Actually, that's one of the main ideas of the book. So by the way, magandang gabi po sa lahat. So the Burnout Society book is, again, a new book, an interesting one. And it's like presenting a contemporary analysis of society that is different from the one presented by Foucault, and partially different with the one presented by Deleuze in his post-scripts of the societies of control. But basically, the main argument, before I proceed with each chapter, is that we are in a society of transparency and passivity. And being too positive, being too transparent, it is coupled by the idea that too much freedom can be experienced by all of us right now. That through communication we experience freedom. However, this is the very poison that exhausts all our energies, specifically our nervous energies. But maybe what distinguishes the burnout society from the previous society, specifically from the disciplinary society, is that here the enemy is ourselves. Unlike in the past, the enemy is well defined. The enemy is outside us, the colonial other, our boss, our dean, our chair, for example. No? But now the enemy is ourselves. No? To the point that we wage a war against ourselves, to the point that the exploiter is the exploited at the same time. So let me proceed with chapter 1. In my ebook, it's page 9. No? So it's the part where we talk about Baudrillard when he argues that we are living in an obesity of all current systems. Anong page ba yun? About harm. Yeah, yan. Anong page dyan, Anton?
Page 4 po.
Page 4, so -5 pala, no? Okay, so let me just read this part. As I was saying, harm, and this is in the second paragraph, harm does not come from negativity alone, but also from positivity, not just from the other or the foreign, but also from the same. Such violence of passivity is clearly what Baudrillard has in mind when he writes, "He who lives by the same shall die by the same." Likewise, he speaks of the obesity of all current systems of information, communication, and production. So fat does not provoke. No? So again, in relation to the very idea of the first chapter, that in the past, the enemy is perhaps identified. That's why immunologically speaking, we can activate our immunological defense. No? But now, because of too much passivity, this passivity of this achievement society makes our immunological defense disabled. Like I said, we don't know that we are already exploiting ourselves. No? To use the language of Deleuze Quaternary in Ida Oedipus, it is already, people are now are exhibiting a kind of ethical fascism where we choose our own oppression and we seek for more. So I think that's the only thing very important for me for this chapter. Next is in the Beyond Disciplinary Society, page.
Antawan, pwede magtanong? Yes, Sir
Yes, yes.
Reniel.
Again, tanungan na ba agad pag ganun?
Oo, nakagabi
Ganun na
tayo.
ba? Okay, sige. Pasensya na, napag-aalat na ngayon ako umattend eh.
Hindi, kasi ganito nga parang kwentuhan siya, parang conversation. So, anytime na mayroong gustong magtanong, magtatanong.
Okay,
And,
okay. Hindi masyadong formal, no?
oo. Although, ako, I consider myself as a newbie dito kay Byung-Chul Han. Ano? So, I would really appreciate any insight from anyone who has read him extensively or studied closely his text. Yung tanong ko lang, kasi kanina in your introduction, yung nabanggit mo na para bang the enemy is already within us. At sabi mo, parang it appears that the exploiter and the exploited inhabit the same self. Something like that. No? Ang tanong ko lang, is it really the fact that the enemy is within us, or is Byung-Chul Han trying to say na we are actually para bang at that point where we are refusing to consider anything or anyone an enemy? Ganun yung dating sa akin eh. Parang now is no longer the time for us to recognize anything as enemy. Parang ganon. Okay. I would appreciate an enlightenment on that.
Oh, doon nga po. I started reading this yesterday, so I finished kaninang 6 p.m. No? But anyway, to begin with, the society of passivity and the achievement society being described by Byung-Chul Han is a society where people look at things as positive. They justify all things, all struggles, all challenges, all tasks, no, as something that would better themselves. No? Kaya nga nagkakaroon tayo ng mga motivational speaker, mga seminars about life's problems, etc., etc. Kasi it presupposes that we simply accept everything positively. So our society becomes too positive, and this is something pathological for him. So even though things which will murder us, things which will debase our critical thinking or capacity to pause for a while, all of these are considered as part that would make us better people, competitive individuals. So that is the parang yun yung illusion, no? At the same time, because of that, because of this endless pressure, we become an exploiter at the same time, exploited.
If I may add po, Doc, kasi yung, ito nga that's what I mentioned earlier na it was nice that Byung-Chul Han, and I would like to think that he was able to converse with Sloterdijk about this. Kasi in the spherology, in the Spheres trilogy of Sloterdijk, the first book talks about that he would like to posit that immunologization of humanity as that development of parang defending ourselves against the other. That's why I really appreciate how Doc Ran was able to. I mean, how he shared with us earlier the idea of immune. Immunity. I think that's something very very important for us today, right? I mean, that's why we stay home because we want to immunize ourselves. Uh, I, how I would read it is that when Byung-Chul Han tells us that we've gone to a point that even, I mean, here, that's why I moved up the page. The tourist travels through it. We don't anymore see the alien as something foreign, something dangerous to that extent. I mean, the fact lang that we would prioritize, for example, travel in time of pandemic kasi we need money or uunahin, I mean, it's one of the priorities of government to, I mean, travel. I mean, Boracay, ayusin ng Boracay than other services. Uh, because what is foreign to us is something open for consumption, something not, I mean, it's part of it already. Uh, and I think parang sabi nga po ni Doc Ran na kasi yung I mean that's also the point of Deleuze when he says yung becoming eh. We have these institutions that become one another pero Han goes a step further by saying uh, gone were the days na talaga the I is separated from the other. Today we incorporated it, the fact lang I mean and I think if I may lang I think the fact lang that we're working from home now it talagang now home is everything. Home is church kasi we go to mass online. Home is work because we're teaching. Home is school because ako I'm studying. Uh home is where I buy food kasi I mean scrolling online. Ngayon what is the idea of yung immunized sphere eh tayong lahat magkakasama na po doon. I mean that's how I would see it.
Yeah, maybe because of the pandemic, his idea remains true that our defense against the other is down or is already debased, no? But at the same time, perhaps because of the pandemic, we try to revisit our understanding of immunological defense, no? Although I think how we treat or how we look at the pandemic nowadays is not as philosophical as what Han is telling, no? But perhaps again we look at the other, even our relatives, no, even the person in front of our house, no, our friends for the longest time, no, as a possible transmitter of the virus, no. So perhaps maybe to rethink if Han is to rethink his theory, perhaps we are now in a world of in a society of passivity or passivity, and at the same time perhaps some old practices or old are returning back, you know, and I think that deserves to be these practices deserve to be rethought or reconfigured, you know?
Yeah, just like po Doc yung wait, kasi there's this page I got post I found this striking post immunological indeed postmodern difference does not make anyone sick in terms of immunology it represents the same. I mean yung uh we're following Han. I mean how I would follow it. We've gone past yung defense talaga. Na like what you said po, Doc, parang we put down our guard. Uh, and I think that's to some extent that banks on the idea of postmodernity. I mean that's one way to look at it. Uh, it doesn't make anyone sick. Well, kasi I mean working on Foucault, working on Deleuze, we've gone past those institutions or gone past those bracketing. Na ngayon, instead of bracketing things, we would just include everything. Kasi parang all subjects will talk about holistic development, holistic information, holistic ganyan. Na I was reminded of the message of one of the comments of Doc Pao dun sa chat na yung specialization, that's still important. Kasi today nawawala yung compartmentalization, di ba po? Yung parang specialization. Nagiging it's more of the same. Peta after peta, paper after paper, pare-parehas naman. Hindi naman nila binabasa yung mga pinapabasa natin. Ay, may hugot yun. Pero you get me po, Doc. Parang ganun yung...
May gusto ko yatang patamaan.
Ay, wala naman po, Doc. Yan lang.
Okay.
Actually, naka-login siya. Iba lang yung pangalan.
Diba? I mean,
Anton,
ano lang po?
Anton, can you just make the text larger if possible? Yan, so that when you highlight, nakikita namin yung ina-highlight mo. Thank you.
Ito po this is the passage that I just cited. Post-immunological difference does not make anyone sick. In terms of immunology, it represents the same. I mean, in chilling factor, it would parang yung return of the same that Heidegger would say. And kasi he remember, he worked on Heidegger. Kaya parang po yung, I think it's something talaga that stuck to him. Or he would talk about the same. Yun. I mean, just like that's why akin to that. Siguro, Doc, working on also Baudrillard and Esposito. Esposito. He mentions...
Nilagpasan ko kasi yung part na yan kasi excited ako dun sa mas detalye. No? Sige, I would be very happy to...
Ito po, parang hybridization. I just found it interesting po. Hybridization, which dominates not just current culture, theoretical discourse.
Anong page?
Page 3 po lang, Doc.
Okay.
Hybridization, which dominates not just current culture, theoretical discourse, but also the feeling of life in general, stands diametrically opposed to immunization. Wala na pa. I just found it very a bit striking kasi today it's more hybrid kasi parang at the same time po we clamor for progress. I mean, as a species, we clamor for progress. Pero parang when is enough? Would we be able to see na teka, we're going against yung parang foundation na natin na our progress is banked on immunization. Because of today's hybridization, we're going against those boundary building. Would you want to respond po, Doc, or kasi Doc Pao raised his hand?
Yeah, Sir Pao,
Whether is hybridization. I just want to maybe clarify that the relationship between hybridization and immunization. It seems to me, at least in the sentence there that is highlighted, that they are in opposition to one another. Immunology does not allow hybridization to occur in the first place. Hybridization, which dominates not just the current culture theoretical discourse, but also the feeling of life in general. I don't know if, just maybe to clarify, is the author referring here, is Han referring here to hybridization in society, or the hybridization of perception of that society, which is characterized by immunization? Kasi the way I understand immunization in relation to the previous discussion with Jovi earlier, about what Rainiel said, that today we don't have an enemy but ourselves. We become our very own enemies. Or put it in a rather in a larger scale, no? So parang we have adapted, acclimatized ourselves with the system, that we unlike as Rainiel said, unlike in Deleuze and Foucault, we could still identify the enemy. But today the enemy is what we cannot identify the enemy because uh, it becomes a self-referential uh, thing, right? So when you say hybrid, so immunization, I don't know if immunization in this context is precisely the fact that we have already accepted, as Reniel said, we have become passive, or as I would put it, we have acclimatized to the system itself. That we don't need to identify the system as our enemy. We have embraced the system, and so it becomes part of us. So in other words, any politics of identity is somewhat erased or ignored because there's no point in philosophically or even practically looking for identity, because we have already identified uh, with the system, which is complex, right? And that complexity uh, results in what Han refers to as burnout society. And we as we as I don't know, philosophers or people who are still interested in this, hybridization is precisely um, our way of perceiving, that complexity. I don't know if I got it correctly. Medyo mahaba na yung aking drivel, but I don't know. I just wanted to clarify. Anyone, even Dr. Reyes or Anton can, o maski sino na nakabasa ng text.
Okay. I think, sir, you got it correctly. And before that highlighted part, in the first part, it's that the immunological paradigm is something incompatible with globalization. No? And I think he is equating here globalization with hybridization, where all boundaries, all hierarchies, all identities are already eradicated.
But does he have a negative view of globalization, or does he interpret global? Because most of contemporary philosophers are critical of globalization. But about Han, does he have an alternative take on globalization?
Although, of course, this book is, I think, not enough to really make sense of your question, sir. No? Pero trying to maybe speculate, I think he's criticizing the very idea of Western, the globalization project, no, because it perhaps ano ba, it destroys. Parang meron siya pinanggagalingan na the old. Parang if you notice, he referred back to old philosophers, old thinkers, old painters. For example, si Peter Handke, no? Where he is parang he's coming from a certain, although this is just my analysis, no. So his view of globalization or hybridization for me at this point, no, is quite negative. Gaya nga ng sabi ni Anton, during its formative years, of course, we welcome globalization, hybridization, but the effect of this one is that our capacity to defend ourselves, no, to immunologically defend ourselves, no, becomes debased, becomes degenerated. No? And for example, in the past po, we look at the other as an intruder, an enemy, but now we simply welcome everything outside. No? And again, in connection to what I mentioned a while ago, medyo nagugulo na ako. But because of the pandemic, we try to revisit this. No, the adverse effects of globalization, kumbaga, highlighted. No? That not all things that are products of the destruction of borders, not all things that are from the outside can also benefit us, at least at the level of physiology, economy, etc., etc. writ large, I think Han is saying that the dialectic of negativity disappears because of globalization. And this is something that is alarming for Byung-Chul Han. That's why Anton po a while ago said that perhaps he's more German than the Germans, because he's trying to expose this problem of globalization, which for me is a Western project. Even the idea of freedom promised by or projected by Western philosophy or Western civilization is now become has now become an illusion. No? So I think that's my partial take po on that one.
Joe, before would raise this hand, I think you'd like to add to that.
Thank you, Anton. Although some of the things that I have in mind, nabanggit na ni Sir Rainiel and partially nabanggit din ni Sir Pao. Sir Pao was mentioning earlier yung bang opposed relation between immunization and hybridization. As far as the text is concerned, kung tama yung pagkakaintindi ko, Han is saying that we have gone past immunization. Kasi nga, we have lost a sense of the other. We have lost sense of the foreign. We have lost sense of any dialectics at all. At nangyayari ngayon, hybridization in the sense of, yun nga, not just the collapsing of borders and boundaries, but practically the flattening of any kind or any notion of distinction or difference. Tapos, the end result of this flattening and collapsing of borders is, sa tingin ko, parang double-layered eh. On one hand, itong hybridization na to highlights identitarian thinking. Kasi parang the central focus now becomes the I or the self. Pero Han is likewise saying that simultaneous with this parang accent on the self or accent on the I or identity, yung identity na yon ay parang phantom din. Parang absent din. So, in other words, it's an identitarian thinking that presents the I or the self as a kind of an illusion, as a kind of a simulacra. At the person engaged in it, tayo individuals engaged in that kind of thinking, parang somehow we feel it, but we're not very conscious of it. Kaya there is that para bang compunction among us to prove that we are, to prove that I am. Kaya in the continuation of the text, sinabi niya na from disciplinary society to control society, we have now become an achievement society because precisely yung pang we are drawn towards proving ourselves by trying to achieve something na hindi rin naman natin ma-achieve precisely because the I has become merely an illusion. Without us realizing it, kasama tayo sa na-flatten. Kasama tayo sa na-hybrid. So, that's the way I look at it.
If I may add also, listening to Jovi, it reminds me of listening to Jovi's comment reminds me of parang again this current crisis of academia, no, which we are all involved in. Parang so when I was reading the idea of the achievement society, that's the first thing that came to my mind. No, how we race for achievement in academia today. It is as if we're trying to prove something, but we are simply repeating what is already a predetermined notion of self. So I agree with Jovi in a sense, or I'm trying to make sense of my critique of academia, uh, perhaps using some of Jovi's ideas. Yung parang we are trying to prove something that we cannot prove. Like how are we an excellent university? But by proving that, uh, we have to, um, in other words, kasi the way I understand excellence is that you have to prove something that is different, something that differentiates you from other institutions. But today, you prove excellence by precisely, even of course, they pay lip service to the idea of your original contribution, what makes your university, what makes your vision mission different from other mission visions. Uh, but if you play the game, then uh, what proves your excellence is not the fact that you are different from other institutions. It's because you are able to demonstrate that you are the same with the other institutions. So it's a repetition of the same in that context. Um, and there's nothing to prove at all. You don't prove your identity as different, because the only thing that you'll have to prove is an identity that is already in a way ideologically fed. You just have to tick the boxes that is given to you. And if you complete the boxes, if you complete ticking the boxes, then you become excellent, not because you are different, not because you can contribute something different. So that's the irony of, or the paradox of the crisis of academia today. We're trying to prove something different, but you can only do that by proving something the same. Um, so yun yung parang naisip ko while I was listening to Jovi. Uh, okay, sige, yun muna, and then I'll sige, any comments? And then yun nga babalikan ko lang before you baka makalimutan ko. What then is the difference between hybridization and immunization? How are they, kasi binanggit that they are opposed to one another, but it seems like if hybridization does it come after immunization? Is hybridization a hybridization of immunization? Is that it?
Hindi, sir. Para pong immunization, the way Han presented it in the early parts of the text, parang ito po yung preceding stage eh.
Okay.
And then from immunization, kasi nga yung immunization, it's anchored on a recognition of something either as foreign or other. And that foreign or other is always perceived as an enemy.
All right.
So yung immunization is supposed to neutralize the enemy or the foreign.
Okay.
Pero ito nga pong hybridization, parang nothing is foreign. Nobody is foreign. Parang ganon. Everything becomes para bang part of the I, part of the same. Yung sinasabi kanina ni Serran na kay Baudrillard na para bang everything is reduced to the same. Ang contribution lang ni Han dito, but that same is in fact parang naging bubble lang siya. It's not even real anymore.
Okay. So yeah, so kaya nga when I heard that, ang unang pumasok sa isipan ko yun nga yung ating debate on the current state of education today.
If I may add po to that, I think that's why nabanggit nga ni Doc kanina na the dialectics of today's time is not that of negativity but positivity. And in fact, I mean, itong problems that we're experiencing is due to, as what Han says, it's this part, an excess of positivity. Kasi it's too much of yes. He later, pero this is like four chapters later, he even mentions Nietzsche, that no saying of Nietzsche that is actually a good thing for today. Kasi today, I mean, it's too much of yes. That's why, I mean, yung in context of hybridization, unlike immunization would at least would set certain boundaries between the other and me. So parang that's an immediate no. Ito kami, hindi na kami yan. But in context of hybridization, everything, I mean, on both sides of the fence, there's a yes. I would see it that way.
Yeah. But in that sense, then immunization or hybridization is the logical consequence of immunization. Because when you are immunized, when you get the vaccine, for example, if you get the COVID-19 vaccine, what happens is that your body adapts to the virus by becoming the virus itself. Part of your DNA becomes the virus. And so later on, when you catch the same virus, your body will simply identify the virus as non-foreign anymore, because the identity of that virus is within your DNA, and it has become, you have actually become the virus. So the virus ceases to be the enemy. So in that sense, then immunization leads necessarily, but you can of course correct me, but I'm just trying to make sense of the argument. Leads necessarily to hybridization, which for Han, as I get it, is a more precarious situation. Parang ganun ba?
Would differ.
The way I read it, I'm not sure if it's the same wavelength that Sir Rainiel got from Byung-Chul Han.
Okay, Kim Chu. Yeah, I think that's the main idea sort of Byung-Chul Han here. No? Although he made things maybe more complex by using terms such as the own, self-assertion, etc., etc. But I think what you provided is a more concrete or a more layman's way to make sense of the relationship between hybridization and immunization.
May dagdag lang ako, Sir Rainiel, yung
Sige.
kasi this is also sa tingin ko is key to understanding what Han is trying to say, kasi yung sa immunization kasi yung immunization parang anticipatory for Han. Tapos it's anticipatory precisely because merong early detection of a virus. Na-identify mo na yung foreign, na-identify mo na yung other. So gagamit ka ng immunization in order to neutralize this foreign or other. Doon sa hybridization, although it's just an example that he gave, pero meron siyang sinabing jump it's not hybridization. Yung sabi niya, from immunological to neural. Actually, that's the second stage. Kasi yung neural, you don't have to identify an enemy. You don't have to identify a foreign or other. Yung neural is para bang it's targeted towards enhancement. Kahit walang foreign, kahit walang other, ang kanyang primary aim is to improve, elevate, build on what is there for the purpose of yung sinasabi niya, promotion of an achievement society. At ang best example na rito yung in some parts of the text yung mga athletes na binibigyan ng
steroids,
performance enhancement drugs, no? Not because meron silang virus, kasi this will help them achieve something. Ganon din yung kung hindi ka man athlete, kung hindi yung mga uso sa Korea yung
Plastic surgery.
ganyan, oo. Pampakinis ng balat. Sa mga estudyante, yung iinom ng kape na ginagamit yung Red Bull para di makatulog. Tapos sa klase natutulog, yung mga ganon.
Meron bang ano,
Doping society.
pampanipis ng muka? Magagamit yun ng mga
Kailangan yan ngayon.
Pakuluan nyo sir yung Master Eskinol.
kasi marami akong kilalang ano sa atin mga kapal ang muka. Baka may enhancement na pampanipis ng muka. Anyway, I'm just making the discussion light.
Pero sir, exorcism yung kailangan nun, hindi enhancement.
To add po lang to that, kasi yung sabi nga po ni Doc Ran, kasi Byung-Chul Han comes from yung phenomenological background, studying Heidegger, tapos he was more exposed. Parang yun po yung first exposure niya sa philosophy talaga, yung phenomenology. Kaya parang in his writings, he talaga uses that language. He talks about the self, talks about the other, parang talaga very pronounced yung phenomenology niya. But to add lang po dun sa sinabi ni Doc Jovi, yung itong passage that I highlighted here, the violence of positivity derives from overproduction, overachievement, and over-communication is no longer viral. Na in a sense, it becomes anticipatory. Kasi nga, it's part of us na. So, and actually, it's still later pa po pero yung we become our own projects from should we shift to can. So, I can become something. I can become someone. Tuloy, wala na yung limit. And I think, I mean, if we would link it po, Doc, to academia, that explains why yung the desire for yung mga fake, hindi man fake, yung publications na on predatory journals, in predatory journals, for overproduction, just for the sake of publishing, of achieving. Pero what is the content to that type of, I mean, I explain po this to my students, na what's the point of plagiarism? Ganun just to say that I achieved something. The idea of overachievement, kahit I haven't achieved anything.
Pagsusulat ng papel na hindi naiintindihan.
Opo, to think that kahit, I mean, and sometimes they think na, they don't think that it is wrong. Parang ganun po. It's no longer viral. It's no longer foreign. No longer other.
Baka magsialisan yung mga attendees natin.
I think we have my undergrads pa, no? By po, raise his hand. I hope you paano po natin siya.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. Maganda po yung thought na sinusundan natin ngayon. I would just like to add, thank you dun sa pag-raise nung yung parang pagiging anticipatory nung isang achievement society. The way I understand it is, maganda po yung sinabi nyo na the way I understand it is like pag in the achievement society kasi what happens I think is it opens up it removes the limit because it opens up the vast realm of signs of a simulacra that Han says removes the sting of foreignness. So nung binasa ko po yung first few chapters niya, it's very, yun nga po, phenomenological. It's very Hegelian, the language. What he seems to decry is parang the lack of the sting of foreignness. So, and he says foreignness itself is being deactivated into a formula of consumption. And that, I think, really opens the way for when he quotes Baudrillard. Kasi nagiging parang na lang siya, system, everything becomes a system of objects, achievement, records, become a system of signs that are to be improved upon or are to be, beat. Pag may world record, kailangan i-beat. So, parang nawawala, I think, and then he says, parang nawawala yung although maybe this is from my own ignorance, kasi I think he's a very Hegelian thinker. So yung depth nung dialectic of recognition sa atin hindi na siya ganun kalalim kasi na-interfere na with the science, with yun nga, na-flatten na tayo via the simulacra. So yun lang po, sinusundan ko lang po yung yung discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to affirm nga that eh. I think that's why parang sabi ni Doc Ran earlier. I mean, ito ba yung it's down here, yung passage na highlight sa atin ni Doc Ran. To an extent, yung the idea of immunization, it's really part of human society, di ba? It's really part of, it's like a necessary step para dun sa sublation. We recognize a particular difference. And today the problem would be the utter absence. That's why, I mean, siguro just one last remark din. I mean, it links us to what Doc Pao raised earlier, yung idea of immunization versus something.
Hybridization.
Yung immunization versus hybridization. With hybridization, parang we already jump to the product, to the synthesis, if you'd want to use yung threefold na formula na yun.
Mm-hmm.
Let me also add, and perhaps my comment can perhaps bridge the first chapter going to the next. Just to add to the idea of making yourself as a project. And of course, usually when you fail to, let's say, achieve something, then one of the effects is depression. So, but it's depression not out of negativity, not out of repression, but depression out of pure passivity. But the problem is for Byung-Chul Han, and this is his criticism of Ehrenberg, and this is in page 15 sa akin, or page 14 pala sa akin, so minus 5 or minus 4. However, si Ehrenberg kasi, ang tingin niya is depression only happens when you fail to become a master of yourself, when you fail to achieve. But I think the point of Han here is that depression is not simply an existential kind of failure, because it's not simply a psychological problem, but the problem is Ehrenberg's theorization of depression misses the point because it overlooks the idea that depression is also something that can be political, that can also be something societal. And let me read this quotation. For Ehrenberg, depression is the pathological, this is at the bottom part, the pathological expression of the late modern human being's, next page, failure to become himself. Yet, depression also follows from impoverished attachment, which is a characteristic of the increasing fragmentation and atomization of life in society. So Ehrenberg lends no attention to this aspect of depression. He also overlooks the systemic violence inhabiting achievement society, which provokes psychic infarction. So it's not, let me continue, it's not the imperative only to belong to oneself, but the pressure coming from society and from oneself to achieve that causes exhaustive depression. And again, maybe in the other pages, Han will say that psychology or psychoanalysis cannot provide a solution to solve this problem of depression, because in the first place, psychoanalysis and psychology are based on the idea of repression and negation. But depression in today's time, which is neuronal, is already based on too much passivity, too much achievement mentality.
I would want to add to that nga po. I mean, that's why, I mean, before this page, mentions yung parang the positivity of Kant, how the positivity of Kant is much more efficient than the negativity of should, kasi nawawala yung repression, and today we really see that in our society, how Kant is something that really abounds. you can become something, you can become someone. I explain this sometimes to my students as the promise of Barbie. Na kung ano man gusto ko gawin, gusto ko maging, kaya ko. Maybe it's to an extent it's our own wrongdoing. Kasi at one point, I mean, we like the effects of capitalism. Tayo din ang gumawa. Today we have uncontrolled forms of capitalism, like surveillance capitalism and so on. So that yung parang the violence of Ken and how it is able to control society. I think Doc Pao would say something.
Yeah, I just that's very interesting, and I would like to ask some of our younger colleagues here, no, especially yung mga I don't know, ano pang generation ba ngayon? Hindi ko na alam
AA.
eh.
Simula.
I feel like the Generation X has gone past the ano, di ba? Hindi ko na alam kung ano yung mga ano. But I'd like to hear their, I mean, if they could react to that line, the positivity of can is much more efficient than the negativity of should. Because of the, parang kasi ngayon, almost everything is available. Not especially now that
Nothing is
online.
impossible.
Yeah, I mean, everything is available, which makes things possible, anything possible. They don't actually exert too much effort when they try to achieve or try to obtain things, specifically consumer products. Kasi they could just go online and then order for the products that they want, that they can buy, but it's a but of course, the question whether they should buy that product or not is another thing. And but not only that, yung para bang not only buying consumer products online or via other means, pero yung the fact that they could become whatever they can, but whether they should, and they can do whatever they want to do or can do, but whether they should do these things is something that usually is not entertained. So baka meron silang gustong i-share based on their experience, no? Nahihiya lang sila magsalita.
No, I think Doc Neil would want to say something kasi he chatted he typed sa ating chat box. Maybe
Sige.
Neil would want to react to what Dr. Bolaños just said, or parang elaborate just a bit sa chat.
Hello po.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, hello po. Sorry po, ngayon lang ako nakapasok kanina 8:30. Pero yung reacting to what Doc Pao said po about the line on the positivity of can versus the negativity of should. I think po kasi in our generation, how I feel about this is that in our, following Han, who has the Burnout Society, like in a Burnout Society, I feel like Generation Z, rather than we have an inclination to challenge ourselves, and especially in a Burnout Society that challenges people, that tells people or asks people whether or not they can do this. So I feel like there's some feeling of freedom whenever we are asked, can you do this, as opposed to asking someone, should you do this? Because when we are asked whether or not we can do something, there's a sense of challenge for us. And especially for our generation who has an inclination to constantly want to prove ourselves to others, that feeling of proving that you can do something is a positive feeling. And I think that emphasizes, or like that makes us addicted to that feeling of parang hubris, or like the confidence that this is something that you can do. So I feel like the positivity of Ken is a false promise of that burnout society. So yun po yung feeling ko about it.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Well, yeah, you've mentioned a good point. Nawala yung speaker natin.
Kumuha ata ng refreshments.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I just wanted to comment on Neil's ang tawag dito? I would like to comment on Neil's observation. Yung Ken, I mean, I just wanted to say that even the way social media is being used today, no, reflects precisely this overabundance of the positivity of Can. And that's why in social media, there's this overabundance of things that basically don't that well in reality we don't really care about. Most that we see in social media is garbage. Kaya and there's this proliferation of garbage because people can post anything. But as to whether they should post something or anything at all is out of the equation because the platform allows them to to post, and they can post anything, and there's no filtering, and the way social media acts on I mean the way social media filters, for example, whatever social media that is, Twitter or Facebook or even YouTube, the filtering mechanism is reactionary. It happens after the fact. The damage has been done. For example, um, uh, they only canceled Trump's social media accounts after the fact, after the riot, right? But they weren't able to. Maybe they knew the dangers of the tweets coming from Trump, but they didn't act on those tweets during the time when they were yung parabang the period where when those tweets or messages were sent out. So yung ganung ano anyway, I was just reacting to Neil's observation, which I think is quite valid. It's a good thing that I mean, I agree with him that there's a kind of precariousness nga to this culture of can, no? The can culture, dahil kaya or pwedeng gawin, gagawin. Kaya yung mga challenge, yung there's this bucket challenge, yung remember that, yung ice bucket challenge, and everybody was doing it, but for what purpose? So anyway, but if you can school me on the purpose of that, then I'd be happy to retract my criticism.
Join the challenge, Doc.
No, I'd be happy to do the challenge myself. No, I'll just retract my criticism.
I think Doc Jovi first raised his hand. He would say something.
Una mag-react muna ako dun sa bucket challenge. Actually, yun yung dapat nating i-promote yung people would be asking the question bakit. Bucket challenge. Pag yun siguro yung na-promote natin, baka sakaling makinig sila sa atin. At any rate, sige sir. Bucket challenge. Anyway, just to pick up from what was shared by Neil and what was mentioned by Sir Pao, yun yung culture of Ken. The way I read Han, yung sinasabi niya kasi, yung culture of Can, para bang breeds culture of hyperactivity. Pero Han was also saying that hyperactivity is not activity at all. Sabi niya, it becomes an activity. Something, work or anything, becomes an activity only if we are able to show or demonstrate yung ating capability for boredom and tiredness. Yung our ability to get ourselves interrupted. Nasabi ni Han, we are slowly losing to the point na looking around and listening to people, ang kinatatakutan ngayon ng mga tao, hindi COVID-19, kundi boredom. Kaya sila naiinis sa lockdown, not because of COVID, but because bored kasi sa bahay. Or boring kasi sa bahay. Something like that. Come to think of it, even if you feed them from their houses and you allow them to move around, is the same malaise that they would feel, yung specter of boredom. The way I read Han, yun yung kinatatakutan niya. We have become addicted to hyperactivity, thinking that in doing so, we are able to produce something. Pero we are not really producing anything kasi akala natin by engaging in hyperactivity, we'll succeed in reproducing ourselves. But we only succeed in reproducing the illusion of this culture of Kant. Yun lang po, just to add something to the conversation.
Yes, that's very interesting. Just the last point, kasi I was going to mention that yung illusion of, I was supposed to say illusion of immunization pero the way you put it, the illusion of I would say na parang it's more of the illusion that that there's yung sinabi mo, an illusion of activity, and in this sense hyperactivity is not activity at all. The proliferation of tweets and memes and whatever garbage that you see, fake news and so on, these contribute to the complexification or hybridization of perception. And that provides us with the false promise of immunization or the false promise of yung getting rid of boredom. Because I think what makes us human is boredom, and I agree with you. What makes us human is boredom. I don't know if dogs can naboboard din yata ang ibang animals, but tayo kasi we treat our boredom or we approach our boredom through hyperactivity, which is not activity at all. In other words, marami tayong choices, no, na pwedeng gawin. But anyway, sige.
Maybe just to... Okay, sige, Anton. Ako, palipat na ako, Anton. May sasabihin ka ba sa...
Ay, hindi po. Sige.
Okay lang. Speaking of boredom, I think in the third chapter, although the title is Profound Boredom, I think Han here is saying that, if Sir Pao said it's boredom, but here he's saying that what makes us human beings or what makes our culture is contemplative attention. And contemplative attention is something lacking nowadays. No? Again, in relation to the comment of Sir Jovin. And let me read the first part of chapter 3. First paragraph. Excessive passivity also expresses itself as a nexus of stimuli, information and impulses it radically changes the structure and economy of attention. Perception becomes fragmented and scattered. So, moreover, the mounting burden of work makes it necessary to adapt particular dispositions toward time and attention. So that's the point perhaps of Sir Joey in saying that that's the problem nowadays. No, we are hyperactive now, but this hyperactivity is not in fact activity, no, but simply doing nothing or simply adding zeros, no. It's not the vita activa of an Arendt, no. That's why for him, our activity nowadays, our lack of attention, makes us closer and closer to the animal kingdom, where animals' attentions are always directed. For example, when they are eating, not only to the food that they're eating, but also to the environment around them. Um,
Bare life.
yeah, that's the point of bare life, no? Popularized by Agamben, no? And in the next page, he said, sige, tumingin ka lang Anton mamaya pag basahin ko lang din yung we owe the cultural achievements of humanity, which include philosophy, to deep contemplative attention. But again, because of over communication, over productivity, overactivity, the idea of attention and contemplation become problematic. But again, in the next chapter, susubukan naman ayusin yung sasagutin yung idea na are we simply individuals of contemplation? So, but of course, Han, as he tries to explain things, will try to perhaps try to organize his thoughts by saying that it's not simply attention, it's not simply contemplation as something of inactivity, but contemplation in the sense that people nowadays do not anymore stop, do not anymore hit the brakes, do not anymore react to certain stimuli, but they blindly surrender, they blindly react, they blindly accept everything that is offered to them by this achievement society. Um, that's my initial insight about the chapter.
Sige pa, Doc.
Ako ba?
Apo. Sorry,
Yeah,
Doc Pao.
just on page 12, the first line, excessive positivity also expresses itself as an excess of stimuli, information and impulses. And then Rainiel, you mentioned that this excessive or the excess of stimuli rather parang forces us to react to I don't know, I would call it false stimuli. I'm reminded here by the flight and fight mechanism, our fight and flight mechanism, because we have had that for for time immemorial. But before, our flight and fight mechanism is activated when there's danger, right? For example, if we are being chased by a bear, or if someone is being chased by a bear or an actual enemy, then that flight and fight mechanism kicks in. So in other words, in that sense, then before there's less stimuli compared to our situation today, where there's excessive stimuli, and so therefore our bodies get confused, and we react to false stimuli, and so therefore that primitive flight and fight mechanism kicks in, just because, for example, you read the tweet or the meme, you've seen a meme and it depresses you. Yung mga ganun ba? And then for young students who are overwhelmed with schoolwork, and yung unfortunately, it's difficult to manage precisely that excessive uh, hyper activity. And so, indeed, excessive positivity has a profound effect on our bodies, and therefore our way of perceiving the world and the way we think and the way we behave. Um, uh, in other words, it seems like we don't have time to be bored, or if we feel boredom, we feel bored, we panic, right? But before, when people got bored, they produced philosophy. Today, when people get bored, they turn to social media, read fake news, or go to the mall, or whatever. Uh, Binge on Netflix, or ano. So anyway, any reactions to that?
Well, before I call on Sir Matthew, I just want to add to that. I mean, I think that's the point why Byung-Chul Han mentions here. I mean, how multitasking. Well, on the one hand, that we pride well, not we, but I mean, like, people pride themselves to be multitaskers today. Na parang you seem to be more, you give that semblance to be of being more efficient because you can balance several tasks. Pero Byung-Chul Han stresses here. Well, hindi eh, kasi what's particular to human beings is the fact that we can focus. He mentions here, I mean, here in the last part, multitasking is commonplace among wild animals because an animal while eating had to look after their children, their infants. Animals had to look over their sexual partners. Kasi at any moment the beast can become the prey, so I must always be alert. I would multitask. However, as what you mentioned, Doc Pao, before tayo, I mean, while taking a shower, sino yun? Yung eureka, that eureka moment. Or
Archimedes.
Alam ko may iba kang ginagawa.
Archimedes. What did you say, Anton? We should took a shower together. We never.
Anton, lumalabas yung mga
Tapos multitask pa. Ano yan? Shower, multitasking.
multitasking, no?
I categorically deny.
ang hirap pag ganito. Hindi, tapos, I mean, for example, Descartes, he's known to enjoy sleeping until like 10, 11 in the morning. And like, anecdotally, his friends came to his house and said, parang, why are you still asleep? It's 10, 11 in the morning. Tapos he said, well, you should be ashamed that you're not sleeping until this late. Kasi in my quiet moments of pondering, that's when I'm able to really focus. Ganun po. Sige, so I'll just stop there. Sige po.
Sorry, baka makalimutan ko lang. Archimedes was not in the shower. He was in the tub.
The tower.
Ano, sa Batalan.
Sige po. I mean, Sir Matthew.
Hi, sir. Gusto ko lang pong mag-pick up from what Mr. Bolaños was saying, no, regarding the parang this extreme increase of stimuli today. Kasi may nakikita po akong parang parallels between, so I think I would like to first speak on the parallels between the economy as even just as an abstract concept and the individual. And maganda nga rin po na nabanggit niyo si Descartes kasi I think that's where we can have even an arbitrary marker lang, no, when modernity really started, when rationality was picking up. During that time, it feels parang nararamdaman ko po kasi yung trajectory nung things when we started to apply rationality to all aspects of life is the demand for productivity and the explosion therefore of activity. So like on the one hand, the economy has to become more efficient, more productive, and even more scientific, no? Because the assumption under neoliberalism is that it has to grow, right? To accommodate everybody. And on the other hand, parang nai-internalize din natin as individuals yung parang techno-economic paradigm na kung saan tayo nag-inhabit. Kasi na-internalize, I think we see, I don't know how, although we do kind of internalize it in the way na we multitask, We demand ourselves to be productive, even if it's going beyond the limits of what we have been biologically evolved to accommodate, no, the kind of stimuli. So if stimuli from our animal past came from a successful foraging of meals or a successful hunt or uh, copulation, for example, ngayon na ano na siya na kumbaga the needs are like quite easily fed, for example, because of the surplus of foodstuffs, for example, kasi nga the economy is efficient, or the availability of stimulation not in the form of copulation, for example, but of pornography, no? And actually medyo interesting din na usapan 'yan, pero I won't go into it kasi meron din po akong nakikita do sa pornography as an image-based medium, and yung it owes its success precisely because it exists alongside a very image-based society. And when we have an image-based society, it travels at the speed of light, no, literally. And yun po, I guess that ties up with my idea na this achievement society, multitasking is us as animals, or as human beings rather, temporal human beings, as Heidegger says. We are trying to keep up with the the dilation, the acceleration of time, the accelerate by way of our communications technology, transportation technology, consumption of energy, yung mga ganun po. So parang may nakikita lang ako na um, inhuman aspects, that is to say, yung machinery natin, machinery of economy, ganun. And then like our desire to connect parang with these machinery. Maybe somebody or though later po I would love to hear siguro parang the perspective of I guess Delusion Kotari for in this discussion, kasi po from what I understand for them is um, yeah, they advocate for some kind of reterritorialization or the creation of new connections, or the encounter of or healthy or joyous encounters of with other bodies. But I don't know how Han will interpret that, I guess, when he says na there's too much stimulation, too much activity. Yun po.
Before po I call Doc Jovi, I would just want to say, actually, I think it's not just modernity per se, but I mean, we could also point our fingers to capitalism. It's actually on the last page, I think, na before the notes. He says here how the capitalist system or the capitalist economy points to survival. And I mean, in face of immunization, that's how we learn to cope with the changing times. Maybe I should produce. And we forget what's the point of doing things. So I mean, yeah, it's concomitant with progress, with modernity. But I would say specific systems and how although we created those systems, the systems apparently took the upper hand. For example, on a Saturday evening, you have 18 people talking about hyper productivity, wherein everybody else would I would well, it's wrong for me to presume, pero are just watching Netflix or copulating to play
So,
with.
In the
But Dr.
Archimedes, ikaw ba yan?
Doc Jovi, before po si Doc Ran.
Thank you, Anton. And ano ang pangalan ng nagsalita kanina?
Matthew po, Matthew. Please call me
Matthew.
Matthew.
Magandang gabi, Matthew.
Magandang gabi po.
Siguro itatahi ko lang yung sasabihin ko with what was said by Sir Rainiel a while ago, and then earlier by Sir Matthew. No, yung una nabanggit ni Sir Rainiel si Hannah Arendt and Vita Activa rather. But Han is careful in saying that Vita Activa is totally different from hyperactivity. Kasi while in Arendt, for example, dun sa Vita Activa, Arendt remains committed to the significance of vita activa to the preservation of individuality, sabi ni Han, itong hyperactivity gets rid of that individuality. Nabanggit na natin to kanina doon sa hybridization conversation natin. And then, gusto ko lang i-highlight yung sinasabi ni Han about vita contemplativa. Kasi at this is something that according to him, something that was missed by Arendt. And yung kasing we talk of contemplation a while ago in relation to boredom, in relation to interruption. At in fact, I think nabanggit din ni Han yung long gaze, no? Na it is precisely our ability to exercise or demonstrate yung long gaze, no, that enables us not just to philosophize but to create art, to appreciate art. Kaya sabi niya, at sa tingin ko ito yung crucial, in that sense, itong vita contemplativa na to, itong long gaze na to, he was quoting in fact Heidegger, yung ginamit niya yung Gelassenheit. This is a form of resistance to this culture of hyperactivity. Kaya sabi niya, if we will just allow hyperactivity to have it its way, ang result nito ay walang iba kundi hyperpassivity, in the sense that it will engender people who are incapable of offering any resistance at all. Sabi ni Han, this is something that Arendt missed. At nakakatuwa kasi it's something that he points out. At sa akin, that's really something for us to seriously consider. Ako nabibigla ako dun sa mga taong nabibigla kapag nakakita ng mga articles that telling us that philosophy is useless. Sabi ko, ba't kaya sila nabibigla dun? Anyway, parang hanggang ngayon ba we should offer an apology for philosophy? Kumbaga parang, does philosophy need any defense at all? Kasi kung babasahin natin yung ganong reaction, using the background, as a background rather, itong sinasabi ni Byung-Chul Han, doon natin makikita that the function really of philosophy is to offer and enable us to enable us to para bang set up that kind of resistance, to enable us to provide that kind of response na inaccessible or inarticulate on the part of so many people. Sabi ni Anton kanina na ngayon meron 18 taong nag-uusap tungkol sa philosophy and Byung-Chul Han. This is a form of resistance. At any form of resistance has its own way of multiplying itself. Shame on us if we don't allow this kind of response to multiply itself. Sa palagay ko, doon tayo mabahala kaysa doon sa mga articles that tell us that philosophy is useless. So doon hinto muna ako doon. Thank you.
Doc Ran?
Actually, yung chapter 3 kasi yung inelaborate ni Sir Joby, pero yung pinaka-posisyon ni Han, makikita talaga dun sa chapter 5, no? Dun sa, the title is The Pedagogy of Seeing. Here he tries to elaborate the idea of contemplation as a form of And here, obvious naman na talagang idol na idol niya si Nietzsche. No? Kanina, pinagtatanggol niya si Nietzsche against Ehrenberg. No? Pero ngayon naman, he's also using Nietzsche's idea of how to achieve a noble culture. No? So in the first part, in the first and the second pages of the Pedagogy of Seeing, and basahin ko na Anton bago ka dumating. No?
Hahanapin ko.
Okay. So in connection to what Sir Jovi said about interruption, about resistance, let me read the third statement. One needs to learn to see, to think, and to speak and write. Of course, in an achievement society, people see, people think, people speak, and at the same time write. But as forms of multitasking, as forms of hyperactivity. Let me continue. The goal of education for Nietzsche is to achieve noble culture. Learning to see means getting your eyes used to calm, to patience, to letting things come to you. And I think that's also the point of going back to chapter 3 of why Byung-Chul Han used the idea of Walter Benjamin, the idea of tranquility as a kind of slowness, as a kind of learning how to slow down, because, and also from Benjamin to Paul Cézanne, because it is only by slowing down, by remaining calm in reaction to stimuli, that one can smell the fragrance of things. No? So that's the point. No? And it's not simply contemplating, but it's also learning how to pause for a while. No? And ito nga yung inano ko kagabi sa this in the second page. In a pure state, this is the second sentence of the paragraph. In a pure state, activity only prolongs what is already available, or multitasking is only a repetition of the same. In contrast, a real turn to the other presupposes the negativity of interruption. Only by the negative means of making pause. How do you pronounce this, Antoine?
Innehalten.
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 Can the subject of action thoroughly measure the sphere of...
Alin doon yung bastos?
Ewan ko nga.
Ano lang
Hindi, basta. Meron kami
Ano ba naisip mo? Ano nasa isip mo, Rainier?
Sinimulan kasi ni Anton sa multitasking sa CR So, okay, nasa na ba ako sa...
Ano? Yung Innehalten?
May mga nakikinig na bata Okay, sir. Let me continue. Can the subject of action thoroughly measure the sphere of contingency? Although delaying does not represent a positive deed, alam niyo naman yan, no? It proves necessary if action is not to sink to the level of laboring. Today, we live in a world that is very poor in interruption or in-betweens. And again, in relation to this chapter, going to another chapter, in the chapter about tiredness, sinasabi niya, through Peter Handke's positive theorization of tiredness, sinasabi niya na it is by looking at tiredness affirmatively, not positively, that we can also appreciate the in-between. And through that in-between, we are to open ourselves to the presence of the other. At yun yung problema na because of now, we want to make ourselves as a project, we want to fully achieve ourselves, etc., etc. We forget the presence of the other. And maybe in connection to what Sir Jovi mentioned a while ago about a form of resistance, etc., etc. Kasi nga, because we live in a very fast-paced world, this idea of in-between, the idea of stop, the idea of intervals, all of these things disappear. That's why for Byung-Chul Han, and this is quoting Nietzsche, pausing for a while, stopping, searching for intervals, though from an ordinary perspective is a form of passivity, is really a form of activity. And in another page, he calls this as negative potency. So it's a potency, but it's becoming negative. Negative in the sense that, ano page ba yun? Talon tayo, Anton Okay. And this is in page 30 ng libro ng ginabasa ko, no? So there are two forms, so 35, no? Or 25. Okay. So there are two forms of potency. Positive potency is the power to do something. Negative potency, in contrast, is the power not to do, to adapt Nietzsche's phrasing, the power to say no. Sabi nga ni Anton kanina, no? However, this negative potency differs from simple impotence, the inability to act. Impotence is merely the opposite of positive potency. It is positive itself insofar as it connects with something which it cannot do. So it reaches beyond such passivity which is tied to something else. So, and again, in the next page, sinasabi niya rito na negative potency is the activity of not to. No? Parang the activity of not to provides us an essential way to live, no, in this contemporary world. No? But of course, when we talk about not to, hitting the brakes, pausing, hindi naman automatic na it produce radical or ano ba, emancipatory consequences. No? May mga tao who there are some people who intentionally do those things not as a form of resistance, but maybe based on other reasons. No? So, yun na lang muna. No? So, tinalo ko na Anton kasi I'm just of the ano.
Yes, sige lang po, sige lang po. Siguro in the Joby, would you want to say something? Nakataas po yung kamay niyo.
Ay, sorry.
Sige pa, ibaba
ko na ibalik. Hindi, anyway, sayang naman yung pagkakataon. Hindi, yung idadagdag ko lang sinabi ni, yung huling part na sinasabi ni Sir Reynil na yung the ability to say no is a form of potency, although in a negative mode or form. Tapos yung sinabi niya na we can tie this up with, yun nga, yung our advocacy for hitting the brakes. What I gather from that is yung bang, para bang inherent task of philosophy to be countercultural. Pero, in other words, yung our task to say no, kasama doon sa ating para bang endemic character ng philosophy to be countercultural. Since the time of the early Greeks until the present, itong philosophy and philosophers in general, yung talagang nagbibigay na, by countercultural I mean either alternative perspective, alternative answer, or even alternative question. Tapos, importante yung, again, tying it up with the remarks of Sir Reynil, importante na whether this is an alternative question or alternative answer or alternative perspective, it has, para bang, it should have a quality of an appropriation. Para hindi siya lalabas na form of imposition. Kasi, let's face it, maraming countercultural measures that in the end would end up as another form of para bang hegemonic instruction, something like that. Without meaning it or without intending it, it's just another way of totalizing a group, a person, or a community. So, yun lang gusto kong idagdag doon sa sinabi ni Sir Reynil. Thank you.
Thank you po, Doc. Doc Pao?
Yeah, nabanggit kasi yung advocacy for slowing down by both Reynil and Jovi. It seems like that's the current advocacy of the department, to slow down, to be in the position where we counter hyperactivity. Naisip ko lang as a kind of resistance to the culture of can, whether yung parang hyperbolically the statement of resistance should be or could be I will not, or I am not, or I will, yung parang I am or I am not, yung parang gano'n, no? Yung parang the context of said contra. If there's this overwhelming I call this impulse to achieve, and you can do that because our conditions are there for you to be able to do things. In that sense, you can do things, but the choice not to, the choice to slow down or to state, to declare that I am not, as opposed to I am that system, or I am whatever the system provides. But if yung parang counter resistance, yung parang, or the resistance is to say I am not, di ba? It's just I'm just playing with these ideas right now. It's not really a coherent argument, but it just reminds me of based on what I'm hearing, based on the discussions, it reminds me of what Jovi mentioned, about resistance, or it's more like an inflection of what he mentioned regarding resistance, the philosophical stance. And I agree that the stance of philosophy should be the stance of resistance. So instead of positive saying I am, even in the Cartesian sense, maybe we should say I am not. Okay. Sorry for the dribble.
I think therefore I am not. I mean, that would be fun for today.
Anton, may sasabihin ka ba or pwedeng sumingit mo saglit?
Magre-react sana ako dun sa question. Yeah, sige po.
Sige. Go ahead.
Kasi, I actually asked this question po kasi I thought stoicism. I included it po dun sa tinuturo ko. Tapos I asked them, what are the things that do you do when you're tired? What are the things that do you do? Parang ito, to when you want to pause. And then their answers were quite funny kasi I would play a game. I would do like this. I would do like that. Sabi ko, I thought you were tired. Bakit puro activities din yun ang gagawin mo? Tapos doon lang na-realize na, nga po, hindi kasi that's yung parang, for them, that's us already slowing down. Kasi apparently, like academics or stress sa family or stress sa bahay, whatever, all of these things are too fast. Now, to slow down, let me focus my attention on something else. Sabi ko, in fact, that ramifies yung sinasabi ni Byung-Chul. Well, in passing, I mentioned that. We're just trying to achieve more. The whole idea of overproduction, overachievement. I don't want, I mean, even in moments na I would just stop and like lie down in bed. I would feel guilty kasi alam ko may deadline ako. Pero if I'm sitting in front of my computer, hindi ko magagawa kasi I'm tired. I'm not so siguro po Doc Ran yung I would just syempre, I mean, I'm not really in the position to answer this fully, pero from some students that I asked, that was their response. And I think ako medyo I'm guilty of that. When I'm for example tired, I want to slow down. I would find myself doing work pa rin sa bahay, cleaning or like that. Teka, at the end of the day, I'm still tired or like mentally and even physically. Parang I did not pause. I did not stop talaga. Yun lang po, Doc, sorry po. Sige po.
Yeah, maybe we can also gather some insights from the undergraduate students, no? So, anyone?
Kanina po, Zeus even commented,
Yeah.
maybe,
What do you do? Ano yung question mo, Anton? What do you do when you are bored?
When you are born,
Basta hindi shower.
meaning how to become slow as a student or how to pause as a student.
slow down. Zeus, would you want to respond siguro? To join sa discussion?
Ay, yes, Sir Anton. Good evening po. Maybe in reference to Doc Raniel's question, maybe even I am also guilty with that. When a long tiring day, and then uh, even though kapag gusto ko lang na pumikit to slow down, but then I'm still tempted to check my phone because parang I don't know if other people would share with this belief with me that parang our generations parang don't want to be lagged behind. That's why even though the temptation is strong, we still to the temptation to like that to play, to check our phones even though that we had this long tiring day. We just want to be we need to be updated kasi parang in reference also to the comment ko po kanina. Uh, that we are considered to be the battle cry of society, and that when I speak of attacks, I speak of institutional attacks to which parang they're debasing our capacities. And of course, the other one is intergenerational competition, to which of course it's also a motivating factor to for us to fully express ourselves, to become hyper productive, even though our actions are maybe out of the line na. So that's maybe my take lang po.
Thank you, Zeus.
Thank you,
Good
Zeus.
daw.
In a way, I'm also guilty of that, no? Kasi for example, meron akong 4-year-old na anak, no? Because I'm very busy. Because like I said, nasa bahay ako nagtuturo, no? So to keep him also busy, I'm also guilty of that, and perhaps some of you are also, no? Binibigyan ko siya ng cellphone, no? O kaya pinapanood ko siya ng YouTube. Usually cellphone, di ba, sa YouTube or sa games, ang bibilis ng proseso ng lahat ng bagay. So part dito yung ang bilis niyang mairita, ang bilis niyang ma-frustrate, naging impatient siya. Tapos minsan naman ako, pagkatapos ng klase, pag bawa maliligo na lang ako, tapos mahilab siyan ko, habang dumudumi ako, naglalaro pa ako ng Mobile Legends. So parang there's this ano no, parang kaya tuloy there's this book na who tried to analyze sleep and capitalism na our achievement society today is a society na parang we live in a society that does not want to sleep, no? Because sleeping is anti-productivity, no? Kaya ngayon dahil nga buti na lang nasa lugar ako na medyo bukid, so consciously ginagawa naming mag-asawa may mga time talaga na nasa labas lang kami ng bahay na walang cellphone, na nangunguha lang ng mangga o nagkukwentuhan lang, no? Kasi this is perhaps this situation is quite ideal, no? Pero tingin ko kailangan mabalik tayo sa mga ganung sitwasyon no? I don't know if that is possible sa sitwasyon nyo, no? Pero I think we should search for that, no? Although wala naman guarantee na when you can do those things, automatically you will improve as a person, you will become critical. Pero siguro we should search for these practices, no, that would cause us to slow down, etc., etc. No? And then last na, Anton, may comment lang ako dun sa comment ni Matthew, no? Sabi ni Matthew, ewan ko kung after sinulat niya to, after nung discussion ko about pausing and stopping or slowing down. Sabi niya, not I don't want, but I would prefer not to, no? Yung sa chapter yung sa chapter 6, yung Bartleby case, sinabi mismo ni Han yung sagot diyan, yung reaction niya dun sa reaction mo. Dun sa first paragraph, dun sa patapos na ng first paragraph ng Bartleby case, sinabi niya na kahit yung kay Bartleby is a form of hyperactivity, no? It's a form of passivity, no? So let me read these last two statements, no? So in this light, his signature phrase, I would prefer not to expresses neither the negative potency of not to, nor the instinct for delay and deferral that is essential for spirituality. Rather, it stands for a lack of drive and for apathy, which seal Bartleby's doom. No? And of course, aside from that, sinabi rin ni Han dito na still Bartleby's, the story itself, no, revolves around the idea of disciplinary society where borders, hierarchies are being defined. No? And this is somewhat different with his characterization, Han's characterization of the achievement, burnout, transparent society. So, yun lang po.
Sige po, teka si Doc Pao po muna. He first raised.
I just wanted to express my I call this my appreciation to yung last nagsenta si Zeus ba?
Si Zeus po.
Yeah, so I appreciate Zeus's observation. But what that reminded me of the iron cage of the present age, right? We I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's an age where we are glued to our gadgets, uh, our mobile phones, our computers, even extend that to our children. A way of, like Rainiel said, a way of managing our kids. And to some extent, we are all guilty of that. But that is precisely the iron cage. No, it's an iron cage because it feels like there's no way out. So we are compelled to respond to a tweet or a meme or whatever. Respond to garbage most of the time, and recreate the garbage. No, so we create the same garbage, so it's a proliferation of garbage through social media. But in a way, social media becomes this iron cage, um, which I think is just a symptom of the hyperactivity that Han is describing in his book. um, it is an illusion of activity, pero mostly we're doing things that are empty. I think the challenge not only for us, for not only for the current generation, yung generation ni Zeus, but the challenge for all of us is uh, to find a way of escaping that iron cage or breaking through that iron cage. How can we break that iron cage? And of course, we don't do that literally. So the idea of pausing, of feeling boredom again, to make something something worthwhile out of our boredom, to not I call this, to not mask our boredom by doing things that if we are tired, no, if we are tired, not to mask our tiredness uh, by doing things that make us more tired. So in other words, uh, it's a question, I think, that challenges us. No, I think it's our new imperative. How do we break that iron cage of hyperactivity? Um, so yan, papasok rin dyan yung nabanggit ni Doc Jovi kanina, no? That at least on the part of philosophy, um, uh, I think our role is to resist um, that iron cage, by doing philosophy, by doing philosophy. But most of the things that we do in academia today is counterintuitive. They run counter to what we should be doing as philosophers. So yun, it's more like ano lang, a reaction to ano. So the challenge lang to people like Zeus and people of his generation, uh, um, uh, we have to pause and ask the question: how can we overcome the iron cage of hyper activity, hyper reality, whatever name you want to call it?
Oh, okay. Before po Doc Jovi, kasi Matthew po raised his hand earlier po, nababa lang niyo pero I'll call him. But just wait, before I call you Matthew, I think that po Doc Pao yung that refers to, or that shows yung transition of Byung-Chul Han from disciplinary society of Foucault to the Losey society of control. And then he would posit the achievement society afterwards. I mean pre-1989, at least things were tangible. Naisip ko to because you mentioned the iron cage for. Before, at least the iron curtain was really visible. So there is something that we must overcome. Pero after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantling of USSR, parang we have lost that. Well, this is more of Freud, yung society. I mean, something in society which we must point to. And again, I mean, that's why we have all of these things that we're experiencing in politics today. But since we are in this achievement society, we see that doping society that Byung-Chul Han mentions here, but later in the text, the doping society na tuloy, it's just at the end a play of dopamine, which sparks which piques my interest, which is more exciting to watch, to read. Yun na lang. That's why I mean, even in the academia we see this. Kung ano na lang yung patok, yun na lang yung binabasa ng mga tao. I mean, at the end we fail to do serious reading, diba? Deep reading, serious philosophy.
And that ties actually, Anton, to what I was mentioning earlier about our bodies reacting to stimuli, to false stimuli, because fight and fight our fight and flight mechanism is, of course, it is activated by our hormones. So the way we in that sense, then the way we cope up with boredom, with the way we cope up with danger, is to to enhance the production of dopamine, no, so that we mask the boredom or our fear or whatever you call it, yung lack of the feeling of achievement. So we mask that by enhancing the production. So how do we do that? Either drugs, or it doesn't have to be drugs. Technology plays a very important role. But with the current generation, it's actually both, right? Kaya nga may party drugs eh. Nung panon namin, ano bang ginagawa? Wala, ano lang, nagpupusoy lang kami, mga ganun lang. Whenever we had parties.
Thank you po, Doc. Matthew po.
Yes, sige po. I would just like to pick up on what Dr. Paulo, if I may call you that, sir, and Professor Anton. What you said no kanina, maganda po yung tanong niyo doon sa mga estudyante niyo na what they do to distress, and myself being recently lang po ako nag-graduate ng college, and nakikita ko po na the dominant modes of, for example, like relaxation that we opt for are also not parang accidental, no? So pag makikita po natin when we engage in video games, playing video games, or or browsing social media, which there's endless content inside, makikita din natin yung design niya. It's very gamified, it's very achievement centered, and this is no accident, diba? But we think na the availability of these options for us are free, are at no cost, if you think that, and I think we're mistaken kasi sabi nga po nila in today's parang digital communications world, at the height of intellectual property, if something is free, you're the product, diba? So what I think we don't realize is that even though libre yung pag-access natin ng video games, most video games or social media, there's still this huge expanse of data and information that's being mined, that's used for advertising, and that in itself is an incredible engine of the economy, which yun nga po, funnily enough, parallels the movement from the economy natin, no, from just producing tangible goods to speculative finance, no. And I think it's not hard to see why if it's not hard to see if sorry, it's not hard to see that with the rise of speculative finance, doon na rin yung explosion nung simulacra and simulation, kasi hindi na lang use value yung mga yung reason for why we consume, or as the good doctors have mentioned kanina, no, parang hindi na natin pinag-iisipan yung kung bakit natin ginagawa natin. It's more like it just exists in a system of science. So and yeah, yun lang po yung gusto ko sana i-contribute doon, whether or not philosophizing is the act of resistance. Hindi ko rin po masabi, but that reminds me of parang previous attempts, I guess, in the 1960s. No, I know we all know this, yung mga situationists po, when they tried to when they recognized this logic of capitalist culture, parang they were all trying to create situations wherein they would disrupt the encroachment of capitalist culture in human relations, for example. So it reminds me of yung mga advertisements po, for example, parang may tinatawag silang culture jamming, yung parang inaano nila, parang pinaparody nila yung mga advertisements to show the parang inherent nonsensical Freudianism that was used largely in the field of advertising. Pero yun po, I guess my contribution really is just parang maganda po yung nakakatakot yung sinasabi ni Han, kasi walang limit yung achievement society and wala siyang limit precisely because the economy is the logic of the economy or of capitalism is one of expansion na hindi na siya it's inhuman. Parang hindi na siya, when it doesn't ceases to serve the needs of humanity, it becomes its own kind of inhuman machine. Kaya po yung mga theorists ngayon, like invoking H.P. Lovecraft, yung mga eldritch gods, when they describe the capitalist machine, kasi hindi na nga daw siya inhuman. And I think in the inability to keep up with the demands of that inhuman machine, which is the economy, I think produces that kind of subject that is exhausted, that is depressed. So yun lang po.
Okay. Thank you for that, Matthew. Wait lang, Doc Jovi po. Tapos we can go back to Doc Ran.
Before I say a few remarks, gusto ko lang ipaalala na it's already 10:15.
Yes po, Doc. Kaya nga, after you see Doc Ran ulit, para
Sige.
ano na po.
By the way, I wish to begin sharing my thoughts by telling you na I am in Batangas near Taal Lake, trying to be lazy, trying to slow down, waiting for Taal Volcano to erupt. Anyway, so bago ko to sabihin, gusto ko magpasalamat kay Byung-Chul Reyes for
Minadali ko yung kanina.
for
Hindi ako umatid ng birthday.
for leading us tonight doon sa ating leading ng Burnout Society. Tapos gusto ko lang siguro extend a bit yung sinabi niya. How do you pronounce it ba, Anton? Bartleby or Bartleby?
Ako po Bartleby ang how I would read it po.
Oo.
Tama ko.
Ayun, yung si Bartleby, yung pagkaka-depict dito ni Han, no, yung para bang a tragic figure, a tragic figure that is very complex as well, dahil sabi niya, he is someone who didn't feel the need to be an I, pero in the end, he likewise became a victim of the tiredness of that I. Parang, I call it a case of a depleted self, na all the while he thought that he was fulfilling something, or he was fulfilling himself by readily complying with anything that was asked of him. Only later on, para bang he lost even the last stand of hunger for life, or the last stand of experiencing how it is to be alive. Sa tingin ko, yun yung pinaka masamang magagawa ng kasalukuyan nating kalakaran ngayon. Yun nga yung sinabi din natin ito so many times, yung the contemporary civilization that we have now in talagang bent on selling us or telling us what is to be an I. Pero alam naman nating it's an exercise in futility, dahil mahirap ma-achieve yun kasi it's the same system, it's the same civilization that puts the impediments for us to achieve that. And gusto ko ring sabihin na I'm sure you're familiar with the Banality of Evil by Hannah Arendt, yung kay Eichmann, na madalas may nagbabasa ron na iniisip nila that the evil that Arendt was pertaining there is of course yung annihilation of the Jews, of which Eichmann was a major party. Pero pwede rin makita yung evil doon as something na para bang
Failure to think.
hindi. It's something that Eichmann himself became, dahil the system in which and with which he worked reduced him to that. Yung akala niya he was trying to fulfill something, so he did it. Hindi niya alam na is the very thing that he did is the same thing that depleted him of his self. And that's evil. At hindi yung sa tingin ko nangyari kay Bartleby. Yung sinasabi niya, I prefer not to, it's too late. Sinabi niya yun at the point that such remark or such response would no longer have any efficacy. Yung sinasabi natin kaninang resistance is sana hindi tayo umabot doon na we would resist at the point where resistance would no longer matter. Okay, so yun, maraming salamat.
Salamat po, Doc. Sige po, Doc Ran.
Ano ba to? Closing remarks na?
Di ba parang yung towards the end na po, Doc?
Okay. Dumating na kasi mga tao rito. Sige lang. Siguro last part na lang, no? Total, alas 10 na. Tayo. Okay, let's mag-proceed na lang tayo sa chapter 7.
Maglalaro pa kami ng games after this.
Kasi yung chapter 8, yung Burnout Society part, parang although some things there were just repetitions of the ones discussed in the previous. I think one of the possible solutions, although not only possible, one of the possible, no, was provided by Han in chapter 7, specifically in relation to how Peter Handke, dito naman parang ang hero niya dito is Nietzsche, Benjamin, and Peter Handke. For him, obviously,
Heidegger.
Heidegger, no. Obviously, the achievement society makes us tired. No? but this is a form of I tiredness, no? When we are being isolated from the rest, no? From the other, no? Where we shut our doors, no? From the perspective, from the voice, from the gaze of the other. And because of this, he provides another theorization of tiredness, and he got this from Peter Handke, if I pronounce it correctly. He has a book, the title is An Essay on Tiredness. No? On the contrary, tiredness, for Peter Handke, specifically, he calls this as ano ba, candid, reconciliatory, or a weak kind of tiredness. No, is a tiredness that provides intervals. No, and the provision of intervals is where you open yourself to the other person. That's why for him, friendship and relationships become possible. But here it's not a thing like a one-sided relationship, but it's a relationship where one becomes the other and the other becomes one, to the point that you and the other become imperceptible. I just don't know how to make sense of this thing of positive tiredness, concretely, but perhaps this is one of the solutions, since Sir Pa was talking about how to make sense of these things a while ago. No? So I think Han provides us this solution by reference to how Hanke theorizes an affirmative notion of happiness. No? A tiredness pala, no? A tiredness that opens itself to the other, and a tiredness in opening oneself to the other also provides a space where you trust the other, where you place your trust to the other. So
Siguro just to add po to that na lang, siguro my final comments. I think that's why it's very important what Doc Jovi pointed out to us kanina, what Heidegger would also mention. I think if it's Heidegger, yung the whole point of Gelassenheit, allowing ourselves to be tired, kasi kaya nga we become burnt out kasi we don't experience tiredness, dull moments, moments in between, we still fill them with activities, kaya tuloy at the end, we don't experience that positive, yung what Doc Ran mentioned of yung candid tiredness of Hanke, the tiredness that allows us that form of potency. And siguro maybe that would be my final comments na for this evening. At least we were able to go over the text of Byung-Chul Han. Doc Ron, would you want to say something pa po?
Ako ba si Sir Pao? Sorry.
Kayo po, Doc. Kayo po yung speaker.
Umiiyak kasi itong si Gino, hindi ko narinig maayos. Maybe if philosophy is to be defined today, I think specifically its activity, I think philosophy should learn how to disturb, arouse, especially us who are already banalized, who are already totalized by the enemy. But this is not that there's only that there are many enemies. But I think the philosophy should retain that definition. That is to disturb, to arouse us, because it's only by disturbance, by stopping sometimes, by slowing down, that something new emerges. Reina Reyes for senator.
Ako sabihin nyo, kaya bilhin becoming revolutionary.
Reiniel, yung bang philosophy should but can philosophy
Can philosophy should?
Byung-Chul can.
should philosophy can?
Okay, so with that,
Bakit challenge na lang?
thank you po. Thank you po very much for being here. I would like to thank po in particular Doc Ran for being our resource persons and for our resource person. Also thank you po kay Doc Jovi, kay Doc Pau, kay Matthew also, and for everybody else who interacted.
Pala to,
po.
masaya.
Sana po next month magkita-kita po ulit tayo for next month. Probably it would be by the end of March or the first week of April. Basta iaayos na lang po para hindi magkasunod talaga. So thank you po very much for being here once again.
Let's rest. We are tired.
Thank you.
To be tired. Thank you po. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you.